She said it was just a work party, but when midnight came and she still wasn't home, I knew something was wrong. What I uncovered that night didn't just break my heart, it burned my entire world to the ground. Life has a strange way of teaching you lessons when you least expect them. Looking back now, I realize how quickly a man's ordinary, everyday routine can spiral into something he never saw coming. A few years ago, my life looked pretty standard from the outside. I was 42, my name's Mike Callahan, and I lived in the capital of a quiet Scandinavian country with my wife, Rebecca, who was 38 at the time, and our 2 kids, Emily, 8, and Jack, 6. We weren't exactly what you'd call a picture-perfect family, but we held things together. Mostly, I think we both believed that staying the course was what was best for the kids. That belief probably masked a lot more than either of us admitted back then. The unraveling really began on a regular Friday after work. I'd stopped by the liquor store just trying to grab something quick, when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in ages, an old school buddy named Chris Nolan. The store was unusually crowded that day, so we had more time than usual to catch up while we waited in line. To both our surprise, we realized that Chris's wife, Teresa, worked at the same office where Rebecca had been for the past 6 months. As we talked, he suddenly looked at me with this puzzled expression and asked, "Hey, I didn't see you at the company Christmas party. Are you going to that farewell bash for the old owner next week?" I told him I wasn't even invited, and that I hadn't heard anything about it. He raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "Seriously? All the spouses are supposed to be invited. That's just how it is. I'll double check, but I'm sure you should have gotten an invite. Come on man, it'll be good to catch up. See you there." Apparently, this big party was being thrown because the company's longtime owners had just sold their shares to a national investment group, and the farewell event was their way of saying thank you to the staff before the new management officially stepped in on March 1st. Of course, I remembered the Christmas party. It was Rebecca's first one at her new job. She had told me she was sorry I wasn't invited, said it was employees only. I remember how she bought this striking dress just for that night. She looked incredible heading out the door, confident and glowing. But when she stumbled in around 4 in the morning, half drunk and disheveled, I knew something was off. We argued. A lot. She told me she'd had a nightcap at a friend's place after the party, and I wanted to believe her. I told her as much. She cried and swore nothing inappropriate had happened, that she hadn't crossed any lines. I let it go because really what else could I do? I had no proof, just a feeling in my gut. But after running into Chris, I couldn't shake the unease that crept back in. When I got home, I mentioned that I'd seen him. I tried to stay casual, but inside I was already bracing for something ugly. "I ran into an old buddy today, Chris Nolan. His wife, Teresa, works with you. Ring any bells?" I asked. She looked almost too relaxed as she shook her head. "Nope. Doesn't sound familiar. Did he say she knows me?" "No," I replied. "But he mentioned that all the spouses were invited to the Christmas party. So, who exactly did you bring as your +1 that night? And where did you actually spend the rest of that evening?" She got defensive immediately, just like I expected. "I've told you a dozen times, I didn't think spouses were allowed. That's what I was told." I stared at her, and I swear I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I was new at the company, I didn't fully understand how the invitation worked." That hit me wrong. "So what, you're telling me you were the only one who couldn't figure it out? The only spouse who missed the memo?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even though my frustration was bubbling. "I promised to look into who screwed that up for you after the party," she added, starting to sound defensive. "And when I find out who was behind it, they're going to regret it." Her voice cracked as she started crying. I watched her shoulders tremble and heard her say between sobs, "I've told you so many times, we were just a group of about 12, maybe 15 people. We were at someone's house, just having a few drinks and dancing a little. Nothing happened. There's no reason for you to act like this, so jealous and angry." But there were holes in her story. Too many to ignore. Still, without hard proof, I felt stuck. I couldn't call her a liar without something concrete to point to. So I asked her straight up, "Am I invited to this next company party? Am I actually on the guest list this time?" That's when I caught a flicker of something in her expression. Panic? Guilt? I don't know. But she hesitated, only for a second, and then answered, "Yes, of course. I booked it for both of us weeks ago. I just forgot to tell you." That "just forgot" hit me like a slap in the face. At that moment, I didn't believe a single word. And honestly, our marriage? It had already started to feel more like a cold truce than a partnership. Any thought of intimacy between us felt forced, like trying to light a fire with wet matches. Then, as if things weren't strained enough, the next Friday hit like another wave I wasn't prepared for. I had taken a half day off work to take care of a few errands. It just so happened that Rebecca also finished early on Fridays, usually around 1 p.m., so we were both at home when the house phone rang. I picked it up. There was a rush of background noise, and I could hear dance music blasting faintly, like the call was coming from someone driving around. But they didn't say a word, just silence. Then the line went dead. Rebecca looked up from the other side of the room. "Who was that?" I tried to play it cool and said, half laughing, "Probably your secret boyfriend." But he hung up once he realized I picked up. It was supposed to be a harmless joke. Just a bit of teasing. But she froze, completely stiffened, then turned red and snapped, "What is wrong with you? Why would you even say something like that?" I blinked. Her reaction didn't match the joke. Not even close. "That was a joke," I said quietly. "But now, with how hard you're flipping out over it, I'm not so sure." That shut her up. She took a breath, sat down, and after a pause said softly, "No, you're wrong. You're just being jealous again. It's humiliating, Mike." Later that evening we were at the farewell party. I tried to push all the doubts aside, tried to just blend in, shake hands, and make small talk like any other husband tagging along for the night. At one point I stepped away to use the restroom. On my way back I ended up chatting with another spouse, a guy who had been sitting at our table. He told me his wife had been talking about mine earlier that night, saying something about how classy and traditional her last name sounded. Then he said something that nearly stopped my heart. "She was with one of her co-workers all evening at the Christmas party," he said casually. "They seemed pretty close according to my wife. But hey, maybe they're just friends, right?" I nodded and forced a smile, but inside I felt sick. I'd spent all these months trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, telling myself I was imagining things. But this was coming from someone with no reason to lie. That night, after what should have been a fun evening, we went home and lay in bed together. We'd had sex, not out of passion but more like a habit we couldn't shake. But sleep wouldn't come. I just kept staring at the ceiling, my head spinning with thoughts I couldn't escape. The biggest one? Did Rebecca see me as some outdated, simple-minded guy, some clueless caveman? Or had I been too kind, too trusting, too much of a nice guy, to see what was right in front of me? At first things seemed okay. For about a week or so nothing really stood out. There were no arguments, no awkward silences. Just quiet, almost like we were settling into a new rhythm. I started to feel this cautious sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, our marriage was getting back on track. I wasn't foolish enough to think we were magically fixed, but the air between us felt a little less heavy. That is, until it all fell apart like a deck of cards caught in the wind. It was a Wednesday morning. I was in the kitchen, half asleep, pouring coffee when I noticed something subtle but off. Rebecca had taken more time than usual getting ready. Her hair was styled neatly, way more polished than her typical weekday ponytail, and she was dressed a touch nicer than what she usually wore for work. As I sat down across from her at the table, she said it casually, almost like it had slipped her mind. "Oh, I forgot to mention, I might be meeting up with some folks after work today." She didn't offer any more than that and I didn't push. I just nodded, but something in my gut stirred. After breakfast, I stepped out to take the trash, just a couple of minutes, and when I came back, she'd changed. Now she was wearing something much more casual, her hair quickly redone into that everyday style. No explanation. No mention of what had changed in those few minutes. And me? I stood there at a loss for words. My head was spinning. That's when it really hit me. If she was innocent, I'd pushed her too far. I'd made her feel cornered, scrutinized, maybe even ashamed. But if she wasn't? If she was hiding something? Then we were already past the point of no return. I kept thinking that maybe if I'd handled things differently, collected proof first instead of confronting her emotionally, I'd be standing on more solid ground. But that opportunity had come and gone. In my search for clarity, I started checking anything I could. One afternoon while she was out, I logged into our shared computer. That's when I discovered she had set up a new email account. It was still fairly fresh, just a few messages in the inbox, mostly spam. But I did find a small email thread from the first week the account had been active. She'd reached out to a few old acquaintances, letting them know she had a new email and was online again. Nothing suspicious in her messages, but there was one reply that stood out. She deleted it, but I managed to recover the preview. "Great to have my darling online again." That phrase hit me in the chest. It came from someone who signed off as Happy Lad. I didn't recognize the name, and at first there wasn't much to go on. But it didn't take long before I found another message from him. He'd written, "Sitting alone in this hotel room, Wish you were here to keep me company. She hadn't responded to that one. Not by email anyway. I had a strong feeling this guy, whoever he was, wasn't just an old friend. But that was the frustrating part. I didn't have anything solid. Just vague signs and my growing gut instinct. I started trying to connect dots. One name came up again, Frederick. A salesman. A pretty common name, nothing distinct to search. But something about it made me suspicious. I figured maybe he worked at her company, but there was nothing on her computer that confirmed that. Still, something told me he was the one. The reality was, people don't spill secrets through email anymore. Not when phones make everything easier and harder to trace. I knew if she and this Frederick were in contact, it was happening through texts or calls. I started thinking like a man on a mission. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted truth. I needed to know. So I prepared. I cleared my schedule, made sure I had the time and space to follow through, and told myself I was going to find answers one way or another. Even if it hurt. That morning started like any other, or at least it looked that way on the surface. Rebecca left for work, taking Jack with her to drop him off at preschool. Emily headed off to school shortly after, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders as she ran to catch the bus. Me. I stayed behind. I'd taken another day off from work, though no one knew that but me. By 10:30 a.m., I was sitting alone in my van, parked just down the street from Rebecca's office building. I'd found the perfect spot, close enough to watch her car and the side employee entrance, but shaded by trees and made invisible thanks to the dark-tinted windows in the back. I sat in silence, every nerve tight, every second stretching longer than the last. Then just after 11 o'clock I saw her. She walked across the parking lot with a purpose. No hesitation, got into her car and drove off. I followed at a distance, heart pounding harder than it had in years. She didn't go to a coffee shop or any lunch spot nearby. She drove straight to a residential area I'd never seen her visit before. I waited a moment, then parked and followed on foot. The apartment building was small, simple, and tucked away. It only took a few minutes of standing in the hallway before I saw him, Frederick. He opened the door to let her in, casual and relaxed, like this was routine. Something in me snapped. I don't know how to describe what happened next except to say it was like everything I'd been holding in. The doubts, the pain, the betrayal, all exploded at once. I forced my way into the apartment before either of them could react. Frederick wasn't a small guy, probably kept himself in decent shape, but the sheer weight of my rage gave me the upper hand. I got to him first. And when I hit him I didn't stop. I lost count of how many times. Kicks, punches, my fists didn't care. I wasn't even thinking. Once he was down, I grabbed a sledgehammer I'd brought just in case, maybe hoping I wouldn't use it, but knowing deep down that I probably would. Everything in that apartment, TV, computer, furniture, whatever looked like it might have mattered to him, I destroyed it all. This wasn't his real home. That much was obvious. There were barely any personal items. But I did find his briefcase. Inside were papers with his name, address, and contact info. I took his phone too, not because I wanted to call anyone, but because I wanted to have the last piece of whatever life he'd been hiding. After that, I walked out. Later that day, I started moving my things out of our house and into a small apartment I'd found just in case things went south, which they had, completely. I left copies of the divorce papers on the kitchen table. No note. No explanation. Just a signature and silence. The truth was, Frederick and Rebecca hadn't just made a mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment after too many drinks at a Christmas party. No, this had been going on for months. And she hadn't stopped it, not even when I gave her a chance. What cut deepest wasn't the affair itself, it was the knowledge that if she'd canceled that meeting with him after our last conversation, if she'd shown me even a flicker of remorse before I found them together, maybe things would have played out differently. Maybe I wouldn't have snapped. Maybe Frederick wouldn't have ended up bleeding on the floor of that apartment. But life doesn't move in maybes. It keeps going forward whether you're ready or not. I knew what I'd done might land me in legal trouble. He could press charges, demand compensation, but if he thought I had any money left to give, that was his problem, not mine. The courts don't enforce debts when you've got nothing left to lose. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Rebecca reached out and asked if we could meet, just to talk about the kids. She suggested a neutral place, a small restaurant. I went, if only for Emily and Jack's sake. We sat across from each other like strangers who used to know one another well. The conversation stayed calm, civil. And then she did something I didn't expect. She confessed. She admitted the affair had started just a few weeks after she began her new job. Said it began casually during a restructuring in the sales department. She apologized, said she didn't expect to fall for someone else, that it all happened too fast. She said losing our family was too high a price, and she promised to do whatever it took to make things right. Said she wanted us to try again. Try to rebuild. She even said she still loved me. But I didn't feel the same. I looked at her, this woman I'd once trusted with everything, and calmly said, if I had to choose between having a cheating wife, or an honest ex-wife, I'll take the ex-wife every single time. Her face dropped. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly as if the final truth had finally hit her too. And then we parted ways. I warned Rebecca early on, if she hired a lawyer to dig into our finances, she'd end up losing more than she'd ever recover. Legal fees weren't going to bring back what she thought was lost. But she didn't want to hear it. She was angry, hurt, and lashing out any way she could. Then Monday came around. At work, as soon as my secretary Sarah stepped into the office, I could tell something was off. Her face was pale, her movements stiff, like she'd been holding her breath all morning. Mike, she said, carefully choosing her words, I think you should hear something before you get blindsided. I tilted my head, confused. What's going on? She hesitated, then said it. Frederick told people we were having an affair. That's why he said he went after your wife. I blinked. Wait, what? He said you and I had an affair? I practically shouted. How could we have an affair I didn't even know about? Why didn't you tell me? Sarah gave a helpless little shrug. Because I just found out myself. Apparently, neither of us were aware of our own love story. We both laughed, but there was no joy in it. Just disbelief. I had thought I knew who I could trust, and somehow even the people outside this mess were being dragged into it. Later that afternoon, Sarah left work early. She looked like she needed the time. I didn't think much of it, until around 6 p.m. when my doorbell rang. I opened the door to see her standing there, holding a small overnight bag. She offered a weak smile. Just in case you were serious about our dinner? I am. I could tell it had been a rough day for her too. She'd just come from a draining meeting with her own lawyer. I offered to cook something simple while she rested, and we ended up on the couch afterward, just talking. Two people trying to find solid ground in the middle of a storm. We spoke about the wreckage of our marriages, about the betrayal, the loneliness, the weight of it all. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, Sarah looked at me and asked, do you think we're just two broken people trying to hold each other up, or is this something real? I didn't have an answer then. Maybe I still don't. But I know that moment felt more honest than anything I'd felt in years. Rebecca's divorce didn't go well. She fought hard, but in the end she walked away with 50% of nothing. Worse still, she was buried under a mountain of debt, most of it owed to her lawyer. During a meeting about the kids, she confronted me again. How could you take all our money? She asked, eyes glistening with tears. How could you do that to me? I looked at her and asked right back, how could you cheat on me? How could you do that to us? She paused, like she wasn't expecting me to throw that back in her face. Then, almost whispering, she said, because I was an idiot. That was the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. I wasn't expecting that either. I asked her, does Frederick even know you regret it? She didn't answer. Eventually, I was sentenced to 2 months in a white-collar facility for the beating I gave Frederick and for destroying his apartment. The court also ordered me to pay him compensation. I never paid a dime. I said I would. I told them all I'd pay once I had some money coming in. But I haven't had any, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't plan to. The system can't take what doesn't exist. Sarah and I both ended up leaving our old jobs. We were burned out, and it didn't feel right staying there after everything that had gone down. She started her own consulting business not long after, and I joined her. It was the start of something new, something real. No secrets, no lies. One day she asked if I'd be okay with something. Mike, she said, I think David's parents are trying to pull some strings, trying to get David and me back together. They're clinging to the idea of a wedding or some big family event where they can convince me to fix things. I nodded slowly. Do what feels right, Sarah. Just protect your peace. She looked at me, grateful but conflicted. I want to go, she said. It's my sister's wedding. We're really close. But I also know what might be waiting there. I'd like to go, if that's okay with you, Sarah said, looking up from her tea with that same open, honest face that I'd grown to trust. I smiled gently and leaned back in my chair. Sarah, you're a grown woman. If you want to go, you go. I'm not here to hold you back. And honestly, it'd be nice to imagine you smiling on a day like that. I know it's your sister's wedding. Those moments don't come around twice. I could tell she appreciated the support. She didn't say much, but her eyes softened. That kind of quiet gratitude says more than words. That night she came back from a walk, her hair a little windswept, her cheeks rosy from the cold. There was something different in the way she looked at me. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, she dropped her coat, walked up close, and pulled me into a hug that lingered just a bit longer than usual. Then she leaned in, kissed me slow and said, "I've missed this, you." Moments later she pulled me into the bedroom, laughing, breathless and full of life. She fell back onto the bed, tugged me down with her and whispered in my ear, "I love you so much. Make love to me." And I did, without hesitation. Not because of the heat of the moment but because this felt real. Feeling. Like we weren't just trying to move on, we were actually doing it. Afterwards she lay there, head on my chest and asked, "Did I shock you, showing up so, let's say, eager?" I chuckled. "You didn't shock me. You gave me the kind of surprise I didn't even know I needed. The good kind." She lifted her head and looked at me with the most serious expression I'd seen in weeks. "I love you, Mike. I love you for trusting me. For letting me go to the wedding, even though you know it won't be easy. David's family is going to try. I know it. They'll want me to take him back." "I figured they would," I said softly. "But I also know you. And I trust you." She closed her eyes, her forehead against mine. "Thank you for that. My name's Troy Evans, by the way. And until recently I'd have told you my life was about as normal as it gets, at least by most folks' standards. My wife Sarah and I were together for over 30 years. We built a life rooted in honesty, in values, in doing right by others, especially our kids. We had 3 of them, Greg, the oldest, then Christine, our strong and kind-hearted daughter, and Amanda, our youngest, now 24. We did our best to raise them with love, with boundaries, and with the understanding that life isn't always fair, but you show up anyway. Time passed. We saw our children grow, and we leaned into the quiet joy of watching them become their own people. Then came the fall. Quite literally. One minute I was jogging like I had 100 times before, and the next I was in a hospital bed with a doctor giving me a prognosis that shattered everything. A spinal injury. No more running. Maybe not even walking. I shut down. I cried in front of Sarah for the first time in decades, not from pain but from helplessness. "I don't want to live like this," I told her. "I don't want to be a burden." She grabbed my hand, tears in her eyes, and said, "You're not a burden. You're my husband. And we're going to get through this." I didn't believe her. Not fully. But I wanted to. That night, even though I never prayed, I found myself whispering words to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. Just asking, pleading for something. Anything. And then, a few days later, I woke up in my bed at home, staring at the ceiling, and I felt something. A faint tickle. I lifted my head and realized I could feel my toes. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. There were no angels singing. Just the quiet return of something I thought I'd lost forever. Still, something was off. The house felt different. Like something had settled in while I was gone. A strange kind of stillness that made the back of my neck prickle. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to pain meds or post-hospital fog. I threw myself into small routines just to stay sane. Cooking mostly. I'd always enjoyed it when the kids were younger. So I signed up for a few online courses and started tinkering again in the kitchen. Just simple stuff at first. Soups, pastas, things I couldn't mess up too bad. But it gave me purpose. Sarah and I would eat together and I'd tell her about my day. We weren't just passing time. We were reconnecting. One evening I mentioned, "Amanda called today." "Oh, I talked to her earlier this week." "What's new?" Sarah asked. "She said they can finally come home. Thought maybe we'd celebrate when they do." Her smile lit up, but then, something changed. She looked away, like her mind had just wandered into a dark hallway. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No. No, it's nothing," she said quickly. "Just, that same day the organization is..." She stopped herself. But I knew better. After 30 years, you don't miss shifts like that. The company I worked for was celebrating its 20th anniversary, and while I wasn't part of the event planning, I knew Sarah had decided to attend. She'd been flipping through magazines that morning, talking about what to wear, what to expect. She even seemed excited. I stayed home, took it easy, watched some TV, flipped channels for a while. Around 10 p.m. I glanced at the clock. Still no sign of her. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. These things can run late. Speeches, toasts, endless conversations with people you haven't seen in years. But when 11 rolled around and then midnight came and went, I couldn't shake the unease creeping in. I called her phone. No answer. Waited half an hour. Tried again. Still nothing. That old detective instinct, the one you never really shake, kicked in. Something wasn't right. I didn't want to overreact, but I also couldn't sit there staring at the front door like a lost puppy. I grabbed my coat and headed out. The address of the after party wasn't hard to find. These things never are when people overshare online. When I got there, the place was mostly quiet. A few cars still parked out front. Lights dim inside. I stepped around back, moving slowly, listening. That's when I heard it, muffled laughter at first, then silence, and finally, some sort of thump like someone shifting weight on furniture. I followed the sound. What I saw when I stepped into that room stopped me cold. There, on a small worn-out couch, was Sarah. She was under a blanket, barely. Next to her was a man, also unclothed, both of them tangled in a careless sprawl of sleep and alcohol. They looked too drunk to know what planet they were on. So this was why she never came home. I didn't scream. I didn't break things. I just took my cane and struck it hard against the floor. The sound cracked through the silence. The man stirred first, blinking in confusion, then gave Sarah a nudge. She woke up groggy, eyes slowly adjusting, her expression turning to something between panic and shame. I stared at her. She couldn't even meet my eyes. Everything in me burned with humiliation, anger, betrayal, but I didn't touch her. I didn't touch him either. I knew if I let that fury loose, I might not stop. I wasn't about to trade what was left of my dignity for a jail cell. But the man, probably thinking I was just some broken old guy with a cane, lunged at me in a moment of desperation. He shoved me hard and I went down. The table behind me splintered under my weight, and every glass, every plate, every half-finished drink scattered and shattered across the floor. I felt the dirt, the stickiness, the cold betrayal stick to me like a second skin. I barely saw Sarah's face as I fell, but I'll never forget what I heard. "I didn't even know if you'd survive," she whispered later, eyes avoiding mine. And he was just there. I didn't plan it. But I started needing him. I stared at her in disbelief. "You mean to tell me this has been going on for 2 years?" She nodded, quiet. That was the final blow. In that moment I raised my cane, not to hurt her but just to react. She flinched, stepping back quickly. "I'm sorry, Troy," she said. "We had a good life. We really did. But I love him now." And then she turned and walked away. I don't remember how I got to the hospital. Someone must have called an ambulance. They kept me there for 2 days. Ran tests. Hooked me up to fluids. Made sure nothing was broken. They let me out once they were sure I was physically stable. Emotionally? That was a different story. Back home, Sarah was gone. But Amanda was there, our youngest, always sensitive to the silence in a room. She peeked in from the hallway, looked at me curled on the couch, and asked gently, "Dad, is everything okay?" I looked away. I couldn't say the words. I couldn't tell her just yet that her mother had left. Not for business. Not for a break. But for someone else. She walked into the kitchen, where Sarah had been only hours earlier. From the living room, I heard Amanda ask her the same question. That was the moment I knew I had to choose: lie to protect them, or face the truth head-on. From the couch, I could see Amanda get up and walk to the kitchen door. She opened it, stepped inside, and gently closed it behind her. I couldn't make out their words, not through the wooden door, but their voices passed through in muffled tones, Sarah's low, measured, and Amanda's rising, sharper, emotional. There was a pause, then the door opened again. Amanda stormed out, her face tight and flushed, and didn't say a word as she passed me. Sarah stayed behind in the kitchen. That silence between the three of us was heavier than anything I've ever felt in my life. After that, I spent more and more time outside. The neighbors in my new place were decent folks. Friendly. Quiet. A couple of them even stopped by to welcome me, share names, and ask if I needed anything. I'd often sit out front on the bench by the sidewalk just watching the world go by. Across from my building lived a woman named Carla. She'd been divorced for years, worked as a nurse, and had a gentle but lonely presence about her. After she heard about my injury, she started stopping by under the pretense of checking my blood pressure. I didn't mind it. She was easy to talk to, and we found we had some common interests: books, cooking, and complaining about the younger generation's obsession with their phones. One day, as we sat sipping coffee, she opened up. "It's so stupid," she said, voice trembling. "But I really believed in him. I thought he was someone I could trust." "What happened?" I asked, already suspecting the worst. "He robbed me," she said. "Said he loved me, promised me everything. Then today, I walked into the bedroom and caught him stuffing my jewelry and cash into a bag. My stomach turned. He went wild. Hit me," she added, pulling up her sleeve to reveal a faint bruise. I wanted to say something cold, something like, "You reap what you sow," but the words never left my mouth. She didn't need judgment, just someone to sit there with her while the pain passed. Later that night, when I was back at home, I told my friend Joe what had happened. He'd always been my go-to when life turned dark. That's when he told me that guy, Carla's thief, had a history. He'd pulled similar stunts before. Seduced, stole, disappeared. This time though, Sarah had woken up before he could sneak out, and the police caught him in the act. I wasn't surprised. I was just tired. Despite all that, I decided to keep going with my cooking. It had become a kind of therapy. Every new recipe was a small act of rebuilding. I had time and I had space. That's all a man really needs sometimes. One afternoon, I stopped by a small cafe near the park to grab a drink. It was warm out, so I picked a table on the patio. As I waited for my juice, I heard a voice behind me, familiar but aged by years. I turned and there he was. An old acquaintance from way back, Eli, who'd once dreamed of opening a restaurant. We'd lost touch after high school, but here he was, a full-time chef now, looking happy behind a white apron. We shook hands, shared a few laughs, and caught up. Funny how some people fall into place like no time's passed. Life's weird, isn't it? He said. You think it'll go one way and it just doesn't. Yeah, I replied. But sometimes, maybe that's a good thing. The police eventually brought me in for a brief chat after Carla's ex got caught. They just needed statements. Joe was with me when they brought me to the station. Before I stepped into the room, he whispered, "Don't worry, there's no one behind the glass. Just tell the truth. You've got nothing to hide." So I did. Time, as it does, moved on. Slowly, steadily. My anger dulled. The kids, especially Amanda, helped. Their presence, their belief in me, grounded me. Even Sarah became someone I could talk about without wanting to break down. They said she regretted it all deeply. And part of me for a while almost pitied her. But I never turned back. There was no going backward in a life that had already broken apart and rebuilt itself differently. Carla and I grew close little by little. She never pushed, never pressured. And though I wasn't sure I could ever truly trust someone again, she gave me no reason not to. She was older than me by 2 years, but honestly that didn't matter. She'd seen pain. She'd lived through betrayal too. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what I needed.